A lot of goes into making a great video game boss. Whether it's the presentation, the design of the boss, the build-up throughout the level, or even the entire game, it being mechanically fun, offering variety, there is just a lot you need to take into account while designing these encounters. In a video game series that has a lifespan of nearly 15 years by now, there are of course a few bosses that will fail in this regard. And today we are looking at these. Hey, welcome to this video talking about the most disappointing FromSoft bosses or the bosses with the most missed potential. Today I will be talking about my personal 5 most disappointing bosses, but there are way more in this series and I could easily make a part 2 in this series if you guys would be interested. If you enjoy this kind of content, please be sure to like and subscribe, and also tell me in the comments which bosses disappointed you and why, and maybe I'll even talk about them in the future, because this topic is really interesting and the debates about this topic are really interesting and can offer a lot of new perspectives. But with that said, let's talk disappointing bosses. Ah yes, the Maneaters. FromSoftware's first attempt at a proper gang fight. No phalanx, you don't count. After traversing the tight ledges and bridges of the upper Latria level, you have to fight these two mutant fused creatures on a very tight bridge where the biggest boss fight might just be gravity. However, these tight ledges actually make for a really unique and fun area, and when the fight works, it's really intense and enjoyable to do. So what is the issue? Well, I think it's safe to say this fight is probably the worst AI by FromSoftware easily, and it's baffling that it wasn't fixed in the remake. Like, look at this. Just look at these clips. What the hell are they doing? I literally had fights where they flew around for 1 minute. It's absolutely terrible. It's god awful. So basically this fight fluctuates between good, very fun, pretty good first gang, very impressive, to absolutely terrible, atrocious, abysmal, and it's very sad because I think this boss genuinely would get a high B from me. I think it's a very good boss when it works. However, more often than not, the fight turns out to be a mess and doesn't work properly whatsoever, so I have to be a bit more strict here. So I'd say I give it a high D or low C. It's sad, it's disappointing, and it could be fixed so easily. I don't know why they didn't fix it in the remake. This boss could have been really good. But don't fret, the future of gangs must be bright. I think we're going to get only great gang fights from now on, right, FromSoftware?
Oh, fuck.
Damn. I just don't understand what happened here. Nito was by far the most hyped up lord from the Dark Souls 1 intro cinematic. He was this major factor in the war against the ancient dragons with his miasma of death. He looked really cool and awesome, and I was just so excited to find out more about him. And then he turned out to be just a really generic and boring enemy who just relies on a really cheap tactic to win, and by himself is a joke up close. It's hard to get hit by him if you pay any kind of attention. The gimmick I'm talking about are of course his skeleton boys. I mean, he has 3 nimble skeletons from the catacombs and 3 giant skeletons which basically never trigger, because why the hell would you go there to begin with? These skeletons can be permanently killed with a divine weapon, which is awesome, but it's still absolutely laughable that this guy relies so hard on these skeletal forces, because without them he's definitely one of the easiest bosses in the series if you ask me. I will say not everything here is terrible. I think I enjoy like 1.5 aspects about it. I really like this attack where he stabs his dagger into the floor and it pierces you from under your feet. I like that it's telegraphed by the scream and a visual telegraph where he puts it into the ground, it being your cue to dodge. I think that's a really cool and neat attack, and probably my favorite aspect about Nito. Besides that, I really enjoy that he can deal friendly fire damage to his skeleton boys, because it balances it out if you don't have a divine weapon, which I appreciate. However, I still vastly prefer it to just go for the divine weapon skeleton kill. Besides that, I don't really have much to say. The design is absolutely fantastic. I think the boss looks really awesome. His attacks are awesome, and I get he's weakened after centuries of lying dormant here, but it's still just really disappointing in my opinion, and just one of very disappointing bosses in the latter half of Dark Souls 1, and I would say he's probably the most disappointing besides, well, yeah. I think we all know the worst Dark Souls boss maybe in this series, right? Very sad, and just a lot of missed potential here. Could have been one of Dark Souls' best. Before I could finally get my hands on Bloodborne, Darkbeast Paarl was one of the most hyped bosses for me because his design is definitely one of the best FromSoft has ever made. However, when I finally played the game, he was rather disappointing. The first big issue there is with Paarl is the balancing problem, because you can either defeat this boss after the Bloodstarved Beast or before you fight the One Reborn, which is a massive gap in your power. So depending when you decide to fight this electric beast, he will either be one of the easiest bosses ever or one of the biggest nightmares you encounter in Yharnam. If you come here well prepared with buffs, you can easily stunlock him and he has no chance to even retaliate. And if you come here underprepared, he will be just terrible. And this perfectly leads me to the second issue. The second issue being the camera. I think FromSoft fans and Souls fans sometimes over-dramatize the camera issues in these games, but I think they don't talk about it enough when it comes to Paarl. This boss has by far one of the worst cameras in the series and I just can't stand it. It's very annoying. Basically, if you lock on, you will not see anything because if you go under the boss, you will just completely lose track of your character. And if you don't lock on, the boss is so nimble and quick, you can easily lose track of it and he will hit you with some off-screen projectiles. And that's a big shame because when this boss moves and shines, it's actually pretty fun. Especially the phase 2 when the theme also goes really hard, which I will say the soundtrack is amazing. It's Bloodborne. Every soundtrack in Bloodborne is amazing, but this one is really good. And when he goes into the phase 2 and has those lightning projectiles, it's a really cinematic and epic cool fight. However, it's just held back by the issues. Big shame because I think this boss could have been one of the best beast fights FromSoftware has ever designed, but unfortunately it only ends up being decent. I think it's a very fun fight sometimes, but it's just not as good as it could have been. This boss could have been like a fight where Artorias and Sif would team up and fight you as a gank boss. The stage was set, the arena looks absolutely incredible, it's one of the best in Dark Souls 3, the soundtrack is amazing, it's just a really good setting. And then we fight an NPC, which I'm very excited about, of course, because NPCs are just the most fun fights in the series, as we all know. And we fight the Great Wolf we already fought before. He is still fun, but that's about it. So first about the NPC. The NPC is fucking annoying. I hate him so much. He is so annoying. I hate this. He's F tier. He's terrible and he drags this fight down for me. The Wolf is really fun to fight. I would put him in B. He's pretty simple and he can be annoying when he decides to dash around for like 20 seconds. But he's still very fun to dodge and engage with, so overall I'd put this fight in like D. And that's just a big shame, because this fight had really the potential to shine and be another really memorable fight from the Dark Souls 3 DLCs. However, he ends up being forgotten and nobody really talks about him anymore, which I think is a big shame, because this boss definitely had a lot of potential. If I could change something, I would remove the NPC and design like a warrior who fights in the snowfields with this wolf. Maybe let the wolf enter at half health as well and make the warrior shoot projectiles like the NPC does, but like make him feel more like a boss and not a simple NPC encounter, which is just really disappointing, especially in a paid DLC. I don't know, I hope they stop with the NPC spamming, but even in Elden Ring there are at least 2 god-awful NPC bosses. I hope Shadow of the Erdtree doesn't do the same mistake. Please, I don't want another Half-Light. I'm begging you, FromSoft, please. I'm very disappointed here. I think this boss is just very wasted. They had a lot of parts to make this boss really stand out. It's just really forgettable. However, even with all these bosses, Fortissax still takes the crown as my personal most disappointing boss. Now, is Fortissax really a bad boss? No, I would say he's a pretty good boss. However, this boss could have and should have been one of the best bosses FromSoftware has ever made and their best dragon. He has one of the best arenas in the series with the best skybox easily. The soundtrack is one of the best in Elden Ring in series, it's absolutely incredible. The lore is fantastic with him being the dragon who Godwyn befriended, he gets corrupted by Deathblight, it's really awesome. The fight is not as good as it could have been. There are 2 approaches how you can defeat this boss. You either hide under under him and hack away, which is pretty annoying because the lightning reattaches really quickly. It can get really annoying with how some of his attacks sometimes overlap. However, I understand why he's doing it. If he didn't have this mechanic, you could easily just stay under him and defeat him rather easily, so I understand why he's doing it. Now, the second strategy is the head hitting. However, this is just not balanced because he doesn't leave his head open like Estelle after attacks. It feels gimmicky or not as intended as, say, bosses like Estelle, Amygdala or Meteor, which is a big shame. I think they definitely should have gone for this approach, especially because if you stand in front of him, you can marvel at all the incredibly cinematic attacks he does, because if this boss is one thing, it's absolutely cinematic. He has some amazing attacks, all involving his glaive. He either flies very high up and you have to do this very tight dodge, or he uses multiple glaives, leaving AoEs you can jump over. It's absolutely fantastic. This fight is actually really fun, just very limited in moveset and pretty annoying sometimes. Overall, this boss is good. He's just good, but I think this boss could have been peak, one of the best bosses they ever made, and they just didn't, which is just very sad in my opinion, because this boss definitely had the potential to dethrone Meteor and maybe Placidusax, depending on how you see it, as the best dragon, but it just didn't. At least not for me. But keep in mind, we never know. Maybe they deliver an even better dragon boss in the Shadow of the Earth 3 DLC. We shall see. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have some other picks and some bosses you think I might have forgotten, please be sure to let me know in the comments. I'm definitely going to make a part 2 of this in the future, especially talking about 2 bosses which are basically set in stone already. I will be talking about Nashandra because she's a boss that could have been one of the best in Dark Souls 2 but ended up being really boring. And I'm going to talk about possibly the biggest disappointment in this series, lore-wise and setup-wise, Vike. I just don't know what happened here. He's just a boring NPC. It's just very questionable why they turned him into this. If you're interested in that, be sure to subscribe, turn on the notifications, and have a nice day. Goodbye.